heard me mention strings many a time in these videos, but I've never really gone into detail about what they are. So basically, this would be considered a string. My name is Priscilla, as I've mentioned. But in reality, a string in Python is any value enclosed in double or single quotation marks. Just for a little bit of extra pizzazz, I'm gonna add each of the respective quotes to double and single. And that's essentially what a string is. Any value enclosed in a double or single quotation mark. There are multi-line strings, but we'll get to that a little later. So right now let's make a sample of this. So let's print double and I'm just gonna single. And as you can see, they both work the same. One thing to note when working with strings in Python in Replit is to make sure that only the parts that you want to print out are orange and that nothing else is orange. Because if anything else is orange, and it's usually because you've forgotten to end your string, in which case you're gonna get one of these syntax errors, which, although they're quite an easy fix, it can get a little confusing when you have a lot of code or when you just want to get your job done quickly. So it's always good to check the orange parts. Now, let's talk about string concatenation. So string concatenation is a way to combine different strings into one. Now, let's see this in action. So let's say I have a variable. Let's call it home type. In Python, when you're making a variable name with more than 2 words, it's a good idea to have an underscore in between them and all in lowercase. That's just how it usually goes in Python. That was just a note. And so home type equals condo. And so now we can print I live in a, and then we're gonna leave a space there. You'll see why in a second. Home type. So now it prints I live in a condo. We didn't include condo in our original print sentence, but it still gets spit out into the console anyway because of this little plus sign. What this plus sign basically does is that it tells the computer, hey, that might have been the only string or one part of the string I want to include, but I still have more. So you should go and put whatever's in that variable over here. So that's what it does. And now you can see that we can change this to a mansion, and it runs. So we can literally live in a spaceship now, and it gets printed out, which I think is pretty cool. Now, you can also have like multi-string concatenation if you want to get really technical, which means living statement. I don't know what else to call it. And then I live in a blank. Also, it's worth mentioning that this little space here, it's this little space here because in Python, the program doesn't put a space in between each like kind of value being printed out. So you have to do it manually, which can be a little bit of a chore sometimes, especially if you have a lot of stuff to add, like more than one value. But yeah. To show another example of how you could get a space, I'm just gonna delete that and then do living statement, run it, and you can see that there is no space and it looks a little confusing. But what you can do is you can add a space as like a completely separate concatenation element. Also, the word concatenation, it may be a mouthful, but it's very fun for me to say. So, apologies if I keep saying it. Yeah. Now you have it spaced out again. So, you could literally change either of these, and it would change it here. So for example, I could say, like, I don't live in a spaceship, and it would still print. Now, the downside to string concatenation is that you can only concatenate two elements of the same data type. So, hang on, I'm just gonna comment this out. So, let's say I want to tell you guys my age. So, age equals, let's pretend I'm 100 years old, because why not? Everyone wants to be 100. And then we could say print I am age years old. Seems like it should work just fine, right? Except when you press the run button, you get a type error. And this basically says can only concatenate string, not int, to string. What it's basically saying is that you can only concatenate or mix together strings in string concatenation. And since age is an integer, you can't concatenate it without getting a type error. So what you can do instead of sitting here and just putting double quotes around that, because it kind of undermines the whole point of it being an int, is you could use the str function. And we'll get into functions later, but basically it's just the word str and parentheses around the integer that you're trying to concatenate. And in the end, you should be able to run it just fine. And you can still edit it, like 45, 90. I can even be 2 years old. Why not? And that's how you concatenate integers to a string, which is the more common type, which is one of the more common types of cross data type concatenation that you tend to see. Well, I've tended to see in my experience with Python. And yeah, that's a brief rundown of string concatenation.